Everyone, welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. The war in Donbas is in its sixth year, and many Ukrainian veterans returning home from the front struggle to cope with the physical and emotional scars from the conflict. Due to this growing problem, the Ukrainian government established a Ministry for Veterans Affairs last year. The ministry wants to model itself on the U.S. Department for Veterans Affairs. To talk more about American practices in shaping state policy for veterans, we're honored to welcome in our studio today Robert A. McDonald, the 8th United States Secretary of Veterans Affairs, retired Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of Procter & Gamble. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Tanya. It's great to be with you. And great to be here in Ukraine.
Thank you. Ukraine welcomes you. So, as far as I know, yesterday there was a networking event at Veteran Hub, and veterans from the U.S. and Ukraine were exchanging experience. You also were in attendance. What do you think of it?
Well, I thought the Veteran Hub is a tremendous idea, and I was very impressed with what they're doing. It's something we set out to do in the United States. We called them community veteran engagement boards, and the idea was very simple. As Secretary of the VA, I couldn't solve every problem in every geography for every veteran from Washington, D.C. I needed an organization on the ground that could be the portal that veterans could come through to get the services that they needed. That's what the Veteran Hub is. It's working, it's doing great, and I look forward to more Veteran Hubs around Ukraine.
Okay, I assume that the veterans coming back from the front line, and I'm not only talking about Donbas conflict zone right now, I'm also talking about Afghanistan, Iraq, and Georgia, let's say. Veterans coming back from the conflict zones do face a lot of problems, and the majority of those problems, issues, and struggles are not physical, they're mostly emotional. In Ukraine, they usually face post-traumatic syndromes, they are prone to being depressed, they are prone to abusing alcohol or drugs. Is it the same in the U.S.?
Yes, unfortunately the physical signs of war are obvious, conspicuous, we know how to deal with them.
Easy to tackle, right?
But it's the invisible signs of war, the mental signs of war that are more difficult to deal with. And it's more difficult for a couple of reasons. One is they're invisible. You can't see them. You only can see the behavior that may be symptomatic of what's wrong. Secondly, in terms of health care, we're further behind in mental health than we are in physical health. And we're learning new things all the time. For example, concussive impact can cause the brain to sever deep in its crevices, and that severing breaks the neuron transfer in the brain. And so what has to happen then sometimes is we have to treat veterans to create a different path for those neurons to travel, for their brain to operate. We call that neuroplasticity. And those are some of the things that we're only now learning about because of the recent wounds of war.
Okay, but the veterans are not the only people who do need to be taken care of once they're back from the front line. We're also talking about their relatives and close ones here.
Yes.
How do you deal with that in the U.S.?
That's a huge issue. And one of the things I tried to initiate while I was running the Department of Veterans Affairs was to get much more concerned about the caregivers and about the families. We worked with what's called the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. Elizabeth Dole is a former senator whose husband's a World War II veteran. He was a senator. And she set up a foundation to care for caregivers. And we embrace them. And now they're really part of our care as well. In the Department of Veteran Affairs, legally, we're generally limited to dealing with the veteran and a veteran with an honorable discharge. But we've expanded that circle of concern more to families, and it's a big undertaking. We have a lot of non-government organizations that help us, particularly when it comes to caregivers. For example, if your spouse was gravely injured in war and you are the spouse caregiver, you need a break. And so we worked with the Easter Seals organization, for example, to provide people who could come in and substitute for the caregiver so the caregiver could go out and get a break, get a respite.
If I'm not mistaken, this is what you call an eye care model.
Yes.
Right?
Well, those are our values. In the Department of Veterans Affairs in the United States, our values are the acronym I CARE: integrity, commitment, advocacy, respect, and excellence.
Okay, I believe that I lead is also an acronym, right?
Yes, it is.
So what does it stand for?
I'm not sure.
Okay. All right.
But one of the issues we faced when we came into the department was we had individuals who weren't working consistent with those values. And so training those values in the organization became very important to accomplishing our purpose of caring for those who have borne the battle and their widows and their orphans.
All right, let me catch you up here. So I lead model is an acronym for innovation, learning, engaging, anticipating, and delivering superior service and care to veterans.
Yeah, it was a leadership model we developed to try to train the organization in leadership.
If I'm not mistaken, when you were in the position at the Veterans Affairs Ministry, you personally went and visited several medical institutions and rearranged the algorithm of their work so that the veterans, upon coming in, could receive instant care and help. And I'm not just saying physical, I'm also saying emotional.
Yes, one of the things that caused President Obama to nominate me was during the time of the previous secretary, we weren't providing care for veterans in Phoenix, Arizona in a timely way. So one of the things we did coming in was we set an objective that by the end of our term, by the time we left office, that any veteran could get same-day access to primary care and mental health care. And we achieved that by December of 2016.
You've been working with veterans very closely, with veterans of different level of injuries, let's say. In your personal opinion, in your experience, is it really possible to heal the veteran completely?
Well, that's very difficult. It depends what you mean by heal.
I mean...
because none of us will be the same because of our experiences.
Exactly. It's impossible to rewind and, you know, bring back the person that he or she was before going to the front line. But
your question's great. It's a very insightful question, because I think what the answer is we take all the experiences we've had in life and we build upon them so that we have a successful and a comforting life. You can't rewind the tape of warfare, but what you can do is you can build upon it. And some people have been inspired. You know, last night with the veterans that we met, many of them came away inspired, saying, "What can I do? How can I take this purpose I had on the battlefield of trying to protect my country and take that purpose further?" So, for example, in the United States and in other countries of the world, there's an organization called Team Rubicon, run by a fellow named Jake Lee, who was a Marine in Afghanistan. And they take veterans and they train them, and then they're out of the service, but they go help in natural disasters. So every natural disaster that occurs in the country, Jake is sending a team of veterans from the United States and other countries to help the people on the ground, pro bono. I mean, they're doing this for free, because what we want to do with veterans is, you know, when they're in the service, they have a tremendous strength of purpose, you know, protecting your country, protecting your community, right? And that strength of purpose needs to be redirected to something else that's also meaningful, because everyone wants to live a meaningful life. Everybody wants to be part of something that's bigger than themselves.
Absolutely.
That's the mental part. That's the building on experience part.
I believe that the United States of America has more experience in targeting these issues that we've just been discussing. Ukraine is a relatively young country when it comes to tackling these types of stumbling blocks. Now, could Ukraine take any experience from the U.S., and if yes, then what peculiarities should we pay attention to?
Well, I think what I've seen in meeting with Minister Freeze and Minister Supran and others is, you're doing all the right things. You just started up the Ministry of Veterans Affairs.
Yes, the Ministry of Veterans Affairs just started being operational last year, and Irina Fries is the minister, and you've met her.
Yes, and they have gone around the world to find what are the best practices, and they invited me here to try to share what we tried to do. And what they've done is they've reapplied those best practices. So I think, for example, Veteran Hub, which we already talked about, is a best practice. You have to have a single door portal for veterans to come through in a community, and that community support becomes incredibly important. Another example is we talked about treating different kinds of injuries that are unique to veterans, and how do you train the medical community to understand the military culture and then know how to deal with veterans. Because one difference between the United States and Ukraine, in Ukraine you already have nationalized health care. In the United States we don't. So we have a separate hospital organization just for veterans. The advantage you have is you already have nationalized health care, but what you have to do then is you have to train your doctors, nurses, and other providers in the military culture and in these unique injuries of war and the comorbidities of war that they wouldn't see from civilians.
Are any mutual projects in this field involving Ukraine and the United States of America are going to be evolving in future?
I think so. Already there are mutual connections, not just...
Could you give us a little insight?
Sure, not just from people like me who worked in the Department of Veterans Affairs, but we also have non-government organizations who have connected at the local level. So for example, one of the sponsors of my trip was a fellow who started and runs an organization called Combat Arms, which is about, or Combined Arms rather, which is about bringing together other veterans to try to help and serve. So it's, I'm encouraged, I'm very optimistic, because you've got everybody trying to help each other, and you've got a committed leadership here on the ground, and a committed population that understands the importance of caring for veterans if we're going to be fighting conflicts.
Also, how do you explain to the rest of the citizens, to the other, and it is the bigger part of the civil society, about the right way to behave and to communicate with war veterans? Veterans are not the only ones who need to be worked with. Civil society also needs to be worked with in this matter.
Exactly. Particularly in a country like the United States or Ukraine, where in the United States, for example, less than 1% of the population is connected to the military. So how does that population care for the military? How do they encourage, how do they keep that connection so that you know, they feel that they're providing the care that's needed? There are a lot of programs that we have used, but I'm impressed by a program you're doing here in Ukraine where you're running television advertising or advertising that talks about making the gesture of putting your hand on your heart to recognize a veteran and thanking them for their service. And by the way, the lady who runs that program was a student fellow at a conference my wife and I endow at my alma mater, West Point, which is the United States Military Academy. So there's so many connections between Ukraine and the United States. It's encouraging.
How would you personally describe a picture of an average war veteran? Who is this person?
Interestingly, there isn't an average, as you would expect.
Right.
There isn't an average. And those who have, for example, in the United States, those who have fought in Vietnam are very different than those who have fought in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, for example, roadside bombs was a big problem. That created more concussive injuries. In Vietnam, you didn't have that. You had punji sticks and other things that were dangerous. So there's no real average, but what I would say is that generally your veteran is somebody who has at least at one time had a strong sense of purpose, a strong sense of purpose that inspired them to put their life in danger for someone else. And what other human endeavor is there that is higher, that is more important, more valuable than actually risking your life for another? And the question is, how do we take these great patriots and help them redirect that sense of purpose, turn it into an inspiration, and they become the leaders of the country. They become the business leaders of the country. I became the CEO of the Procter & Gamble company.
Congratulations.
Which
Which is also a great achievement. Let me be fair. This is a great achievement.
No, I'm work in progress. I'm a young guy. I've still got a lot to do. So I think that's really it. Is how do we ensure that we help them find that sense of purpose, redirect that sense of purpose, give them the care that they need. And at least in the case of the United States, and I'm sure this will be the case in Ukraine, the veterans become the leaders. We've done research in the United States. It was an organization called Got Your Six. And in the research, we discovered veterans vote more often, veterans involved in their community more often, they're on school boards, they're running for office, they care about what's going on. And who wouldn't want that kind of person in their community? So what we have in the United States, we have our communities actually fighting to get veterans to relocate in their community.
Oh, this is fascinating. Thank you so much for
Thank you, Tanya.
all of your work. Thank you for what you've done, for what you're doing. Thank you for coming here today.
Wonderful to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Robert A. McDonald, an eighth United States Secretary of Veterans Affairs, retired Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of Procter & Gamble. Thank you so much for watching Head to Head. Stay tuned with UATV for more.